Hello everybody and welcome to Getting APIs to Work. Today we say hello to Ikena and Wibu from 10x Banking. Hey Ikena, how are you doing?
Hi, Eric. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. I'm very glad that you're joining us. We're talking about API reviews today, and this is how we got in touch. I think you did some kind of survey around API governance and API reviews, and I was just interested in why you're doing this and what your findings are, and then we started talking about API reviews.
Yes, that's correct. So when I joined 10x and just working closely as the API product owner with the different teams, I did take a step back to run a survey across the teams to understand their perception of or how satisfied they were with the API review process. And we gathered lots of feedback, which we found was very interesting, and that helped us improve our API review process.
And since we're already diving into the topic of API reviews, what is an API review? Let's talk a little bit about what you were even talking about when you were doing the survey and started interviewing your own teams about API reviews.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. So for us, API reviews is really about getting all our colleagues who are interested in an API design to get around the table, so to speak, and just review the API design and give feedback on the API design. So we have the API designers; those are the feature teams who helped, who've done the API design. We follow an API design first approach. They would prepare a design in, OpenAPI, and then we'll have other stakeholders who are either consumers of the API or are interested in the API, interested in publishing the API, and we'll all gather around, review, give our feedback on the design, and suggest, solutions if necessary.
And I think this already points out a very important part here, that the API review is part of the overall design process, right? So you have something where you first think about which APIs are we even creating, and then API reviews are somewhere in the middle before you start, I think, probably heavily investing into implementing it.
Yeah, exactly. So in 10x, APIs are part of our product development flow. And we have in-house, we have a product development framework we call the 6321 product development framework. Very interesting name. I won't go into why it's called that.
Very mysterious. You make
Yeah,
things
yeah,
mysterious.
yeah. But it's quite an impressive framework. But generally, what we do is, we always start with understanding the problem we're trying to solve, the problem at whatever we're trying to do is solving for our customers, for the clients. So we're very clear on what the problem statement is. And out from that, we get a high level solution design, which we break down into a component design. And then we refine that design at the end. And so our API reviews come in between our high level and our component design stages. And that's where we really say, right, this feature we're trying to build, what interface should it expose and how should that interface looks? That's where our API reviews come in.
And if we now look at how API reviews are part of that overall process, why do they matter? What are the things that they do for you where you think this is really why API reviews are an important part of that overall process?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So the first thing for us, it's all about the consumer, right? The consumer of the API, and is asking usability questions like how would the consumer consume this API? Are there any defects, anything that makes it difficult for that consumer to consume that API? Is it clear? Is it obvious? So we look at usability issues, we look at security and privacy, personal identifiable information, and we walk through several of these things. A couple of tools we use to help us. First of all, we have an API review checklist that we actually go through. We are making our processes more automated and using Spectral and other API linting tools. But in our journey, we started with having like an API review checklist that we go through. And when we pick up an API design, it's actually quite methodical in the sessions I run, and I'm happy to talk through all the different stages that we run through in each session. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great, because I think having this checklist, right, this really is what then makes it easier also for people to understand what to focus on, what to expect, what will happen, how to prepare properly so that those sessions actually are valuable and effective, because in the end, and we will talk about this a little bit later, right, it also is all a question of making this scalable. And I think that's one of the things where a lot of things sometimes get tricky. But as you said, you also invest in things such as Spectral, so at least you have some automation. And I don't know, would you say that you would think that you could fully automate an API review process?
That's a really interesting question, Eric, and it's a good one, because I think there are some things in an API review process that can be automated, things that are very objective. We have an API style guide that's very clear to say, this is kind of an error you should expect if this is what a 422 should be or 400 should be, and there are lots of spectral rule sets there out in the wild. You could just copy that, and add to your organizational rule set and execute. So there are things that are very objective. You could run them and get fast feedback on them, absolutely. But then there are the design sides of the API review. What should your resource model look like? What should it be? And those kind of things involve a lot of design, a lot of thinking. What should you name your resource? Sometimes across different domains, you would use different terms, and it's very useful to actually have the engineers and different people just thinking about what that resource model should be and how that should be presented. Actually, in the API reviews that I kind of run, one of the my favorite people in our API review sessions are our technical writers, actually, because when we run a review, one of the things we start with is a description. So, please describe this API for me. And it's very interesting because lots of the changes we come are from trying to describe the API. And when we start struggling with describing what an endpoint does, well, then it really makes us revisit the design to say, what are we trying to do here? So I think that there are bits that can be automated, and there are bits that it's quite design and modeling side that maybe not so easy to automate.
Yeah, that part I find really interesting. What you said about if I can't describe it easily, that is probably the sign of a problem.
Yeah,
exactly. Like it should be something where you can explain somebody what this API does, and if that is not easy to do, that's probably not a good sign.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Now, when we look at what you're trying to achieve, right, and when we discussed that already a little bit briefly, it's like you want to, on the one hand, have good API reviews. On the other hand, you also have to scale that up, and you can automate that in part, which you're already doing, which is great, but not all the way. So if we look at this a little bit more closely, what would you say are the challenges of scale here? In particular, with the trend that we see in organizations, they have more and more and more and more APIs, more and more teams are starting to develop APIs. API first becomes a thing in many organizations. So they see this kind of flood of APIs coming in. What are the challenges for API review processes that you would see?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one that we are trying to tackle ourselves, as we scale, because it's all about scale and doing this at scale. And probably the first challenge is just the sheer volume of API change requests, because there will always be new API endpoints or changes to existing API endpoints. And how do you coordinate this, right? There's the question around team structure. How do you coordinate the actual teams that would help service this? Would you have a kind of a central review team, or do you have something more federated, right? And then obviously what tooling do you use, and how do you scale that? So it's an interesting one. So for us, right, at least the way I see it, there are probably two or three important things. So number one would be obviously there's automation, yes, and using automation tools to do the things you can automate. But there's also the important thing about being very clear on the resource model, understanding the business capabilities that the organization wants to expose via the APIs, and mapping out the resource models that underlie that help new API designs, because it's really great to add an API, a new feature or new API endpoint to an existing and very clear resource model layout that's there, right? It's much easier than trying to figure it out when you have nothing, or you're duplicating resource models that already exist somewhere else, or you're calling the same resource by a different name. So being able to just map out those business capabilities and resource models is something that can help scale.
So I think what you're saying there, and I like that a lot, is that kind of good API portfolio management allows you to also improve processes like this because you can more easily slot things in. Is
Absolutely,
that what?
absolutely,
Yeah,
Eric.
okay.
Yeah, and I think I think this is something that you need as they scale, organizations actually need dedicated platform or enablement teams to focus on this, right? It's not something that you do kind of part-time. It's really about enabling other teams, the design teams, do their work well. And so you need enablement teams that will help facilitate this, help make sure that that modeling is going on, it's properly documented, that's proper portfolio management. It's easy to discover the APIs, discover those resource models. Those API profiles are very clear, and the owners of those APIs are very clear on what business capabilities are exposed by their API. So it does require dedicated, resource or people looking at it.
And since you're talking about roles in organizations and who should be there, another challenge that we briefly discussed is you have to make sure the right people are there so that the
Absolutely.
right discussion can be held, right? So what are the key people you're looking for in an API design review so that it's really effective?
Yeah, a great question. So the way we do this at 10x is when we have a review, the first thing we ask, or I ask the feature teams is who should be in this review? Who's the consumer of this API? And so for us, there are two sets of consumers. There's probably the external client who will consume the API, but we also have internal consumers of our APIs, right? And so I ask to understand that, and I note them. I make sure I invite any internal consumers to the API reviews. That's one. Secondly, like I said, our technical writers are my favorite people on our API reviews, so they have a standing invitation. They're always there. And then we have people from colleagues from our API platform team or API gateway team who are there as well as any internal, there are microservice teams who may also consume the API, and they're all there. So we try to make sure that everyone who's a stakeholder in that API and a stakeholder in the design is there. And contributing to that. And sometimes on rare occasions, even when we finish with the review, we sometimes, in some cases, we can send our specifications to our clients to get some feedback from them before we actually start implementation.
That's a very good, but also I would say a pretty ambitious list of people to have there. How easy do you find is it for you to actually have those meetings and not, have everybody saying, "Oh, I have other things to
Yeah.
do." Or,
Yeah, look, it's a good question, especially in a fast-paced environment, right? And for my organization, we're growing really fast, and so it's a challenge, and it's part of my job to do that organization. Not always easy, but look, the way we try to do it to help us is really so things like the um, we provide tools to make sure that we remove the low-hanging fruit before the actual review session. So whether it's the API review checklist or trying to run API linting on our specifications before the meeting, that helps. The other thing we do is that we actually post the link to our specifications on a Slack channel so that anyone interested can start an asynchronous or offline review before the actual session. And that helps just help us with time keep the session focused on the hard questions. I like to keep the review focused on the hard questions, and get that. And then if there are things that can be done outside the review, so we use an API collaboration tool that helps us leave comments that people can come back to and resolve, and I can a couple of us take that after the session and get things resolved after the session and get agreement on the contracts outside the session. So we have a couple of techniques to keep the sessions tight. But again, that's not to say it's easy, right? Because it depends on the
no.
volume of requests that we get. And there's a bit of juggling on calendars and stuff to make it work. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that's all of us can sympathize with that
Yeah.
calendar juggling. But if these things are run well, right, they also are actually very interesting and insightful sessions because, like you say, you focus, you remove the low-hanging fruit, right? So the kind of the boring parts where everybody says, yeah, sure, right, you should do it like that. Those are kind of taken care of, which turns these things, I would assume, in something that actually can be very interesting and educational for people, right?
Absolutely.
Because they learn new things.
Yeah.
How do you make sure that this part then actually also gets shared a little bit, that people not just participate maybe, but also maybe can learn from it in other ways?
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
sure what they could be, but
I mean, yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent question, Eric, because I think that there are 2 points right there, right? So the first one is like the way I see API reviews is not just about finding a defect in an API design. It's not just saying, that's wrong or that's wrong. It's a lot of it's about actually sharing the knowledge of what the API is, right? Because it's important as part of our internal communication in the organization to get everyone on board, understanding what the feature is, and why we need this API, right? So there's a lot of knowledge sharing around new features that gets discussed in a review session, and that in itself is very useful. Okay. And then second to that, there's also just building up the organizational muscle around API design, like getting people in these sessions just to understand APIs, understand what to look out for, and improve their API design. So there's an educational aspect to it. But the third point I'll also make is that it's also a feedback loop, right? Like it's not just about the design. It's also, for me, it's about taking notes from the design. There might be things in our API style guide that do not cover scenarios that come up in the design. So it's about taking those learnings, going back, updating the style guides, publishing it out in internal blog posts or internal Slack channels to make sure people are aware about new things we've learned or new things we might want to do, areas we might want to innovate in around design. So there's a lot of feedback from those sessions that are very useful for us as an organization.
that sounds really interesting. I'm always tempted to ask you to please be on that list where you send out these changes to your guidelines, because I'm sure that's really interesting, right? I mean, whenever you say, okay, so far we did it this way, and we've now learned something new, and now we decided we should maybe also do it that way or only do it that new way, I'm sure there's always something interesting to be learned. So I guess these are probably the interesting nuggets that come out of this process.
Absolutely.
Ikenna, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. I think it's really interesting to hear more about that. And I think we're still kind of, as a community, we're still making, I don't want to say making up, but we're still inventing this overall life cycle and all the things that should be in there. I think API reviews absolutely have a place in there. And I think the way that you do it, I think to me, that sounds very good. And I'm wondering, with all the experience you already have and with the insights that you also got out of like running that survey around the API review process, like what's your next step where you say, and apart from doing all these reviews, here's also my next step of how I'm trying to improve things, trying to make sure that we really get good APIs and so forth.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. And yeah, because in running that internal survey, I actually got very curious about how this works in other organizations. What tools do other people use? How do other people structure not just their teams, but their communication patterns around API reviews? And I've been putting together a survey, which is going up on my website, ikenna.co.uk/survey, just pretty short, ikenna.co.uk/survey.
We'll put it down here.
Yeah, and if you look on that, there's a link to a survey where I want to get information from the community, just run a survey, understand how other people in the community are doing this. Whether it's area about like how do people discover APIs internally in the organization, from discovery to just questions around like manual versus automated reviews, what tools people use, all that kind of all those kinds of interesting stuff. So I intend to gather all this data, just analyze it, and also publish it out to the community in the next couple of months, so people see how it happens in other organizations, and maybe that might be something useful there for people to learn. The thing is, in the survey I ran internally, I find the qualitative things people say so interesting, where people say, yeah, this is good, but this. And I actually find the extremes very important, especially people who don't like what's going on. That's what I'm really interested in. Where well, you might, I don't like this process because it takes so much time. Or that kind of qualitative feedback is so useful because you can innovate and improve from there. So I really would like lots of input from the community at large, API community at large on this, and yeah, I'm looking forward to running that survey.
Sure. So yes, I'm encouraging everybody to please fill out that survey. I will make sure that whenever you're done with looking at the responses and coming up with a nice little report in the end, or at least the results, right, that we also make that known. But yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of interesting things to be learned because there are so many organizations where this is being practiced, right? And it is an evolving field, so I'm sure there's a lot of interesting things to uncover.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Ikenna, for being here. I'm sure that it was something that everybody could learn something from. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing to this channel, and also make sure that you check out when we have Ikenna on for the next one, which will be about your design process, I think. So that's something I really want to hear about. So that'll be up soon as well. Bye, everybody. Have a good one.
Thank you, Eric. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.